Welcome back to In a Tiny Garden. This week we're going to be getting on with pricking out quite a few seedlings, including some herbs, flowers, the peppers and aubergines, and a few others, including all the tomatoes 3 different ways. And then we'll also be sowing quite a few seeds, like the chard that we're missing. They were in my corn packet for some reason and not my beetroot packet. So we're going to get on with those. And quite a few different flower varieties, including some that are a bit hard to germinate. And then next week is when we'll really get started out at the allotment because there's quite a few jobs to tackle. But this week we're just going to be inside catching up on pricking out. So I hope you enjoy. So I'll just take you through what we're going to prick out and then what containers we're going to use. So I'm going to prick out the peppers into 2 little containers like this because I only want 2 of them. And then the aubergines in here and the mini aubergine that's not very far along in there. And then we'll put these flowers into this rubber container and then these flowers into a slightly bigger module behind. And then the celeriac and celery into these modules. And the parsley and the other parsley into these bigger modules because these are actually quite big. And then the tomatoes from last week, 2 weeks ago in fact, are doing really well. The leffas are growing really well. And the beetroot have mostly come up. If there's more than kind of 6, I might thin these out. Some of it's getting caught in this pellet, which is really annoying. And the sweet potatoes are coming along really well. And the ginger is like practically a houseplant now. Outside, there's the lettuce here that I'll be planting out at the allotment next week. And also the peas are doing really well in these big root trainers. They'll go out next week as well. There's cosmos, marigold, and a few radish. And now let's get started with the pricking out. Like I said before, I'm using a multi-purpose rather than a seed compost just to save some money, but it does mean that I need to be careful with the particle size. So I'm mixing it with vermiculite. That's especially useful for the seed sowing rather than the pricking out, breaking up any big lumps. And then for the top surface, I'm sifting it and then filling the non-sifted stuff in the bottom and then sifted stuff on top. Again, that's more for the sowing seeds later than the pricking out. And we're going to start with the curly-leafed parsley. So these plants have gotten quite big. You can see a nice long root there. So I've actually chosen to use bigger modules than I had originally intended. And I can tell you now that they're doing quite well in these. So that's absolutely fine. There is a worry that if you've got too much compost, then they can kind of drown the roots. And this is the perennial broccoli Mitsuba. It tastes really, really good. I've already had a nibble off one of the seedlings I didn't use. And then this is the winter savoury going in, which is a perennial. And they're not too leggy. These ones are actually all right. But the annual summer savoury I'm doing next, I think suffered perhaps maybe from a bit too much nitrogen in the multi-purpose. So seed compost is really low in nutrients. And the multi-purpose has kind of all kinds of nutrients in it. So sometimes it's a bit too much for seedlings that already have all the nutrients they need inside their seed. But regardless, I'll make these work. And they're just annuals as well, so it's fine. And then I'm just pricking out a few more of those perennial Mitsuba parsley because they were so tasty. And they're doing really well. They look really good. This is just a close-up. So I plant them all the way up to their seed leaves after making a hole. And then I just kind of firm it in gently. And then I will give them a water as well. Next, I'm going to carefully prick out the celeriac and celery, which are both treated fairly similarly. These are slightly on the small side, these modules. I'm using the sustainable rubber modules again. There they are, celeriac on the left and the pink celery on the right. And I'm so excited to grow celeriac this year. So I'm just being really careful. The stem's quite fragile here. Just making a hole, fitting all the root in, nearly up to its seed leaves, but I have to be careful about it could still sort of rot the stem if you've got the compost a bit too wet. But that being said, celeriac and celery do like quite a moist compost. So you just need to get that balance right, especially in the seedling stage. So don't let them dry out too much versus other seedlings. You can get away with letting them dry out slightly more in between waterings. But then once they're planted out, they do want a really good drink. So that's the Celeriac, and I'm growing the variety called Monarch. Seeds given to me by my lovely friend. And then these are the pink Chinese celery. So I grew these exact same variety last year. Seeds were still fine. As you can see, they grew really well. And the pink Chinese is really good for cooking, I find. So it's quite a powerful taste, and you get several small stalks from it rather than kind of one big heart. And I quite like that because I use it for soups and stews and that kind of thing. So it's really good. And it's just really pretty. It's like bright pink. So I'm just giving the seed leaf there a little tug just to make sure that I've got these in securely, because they had really long root, as you can see there. So coiling it in a bit is absolutely fine, but it's a tricky, time-consuming thing. So put on some lovely music and or my YouTube video. But I tried to cut this one shorter and not show you every single seedling. So that's the celery and the celeriac. Next, I'm pricking out flowers, but right after that we'll get to the aubergine, chili, and tomatoes, I promise. So here I filled the same rubber tray, and it's got a mix of the vermiculite, and I'm just pressing down each module. And I'm going to be pricking out into this container the Strawflowers, billy buttons, or Crispidia globosa in Latin, and sneaking some wild strawberries in the side. So first up is the straw flower, which is called Salmon Shades, and I can't tell you how excited I am to grow this. You can even dry the flower heads and they stay nice and beautifully vibrant, the colors, for like years. So I'm really, really excited, and I'm going to put this one in the cut flower patch at the allotment, along with quite a few of the other ones, though the wild strawberries are going to mostly stay with me in the garden because I love them so much. So same thing here, just being careful to pick it up by its seed leaves, not its stem, and to get the whole root in, and then give it a light press in. And I'll water them after, like I said. And then the next is the billy buttons, and these are these really fun yellow ball, almost like a pom-pom flower, really small, but they look really good in flower arrangements. And the Latin is Crispidia globosa, if you wanted to find them as well. And then I'm just pricking out the wild strawberries just because they fit nicely in here, and I'll be hardening them off the same way. And these ones are mignonette variety, which are really, really tasty. And honestly, you can't have enough wild strawberries. They're so easy to fit in sort of anywhere or in a little pot. And they tolerate sun or partial shade. They're really, really good. Next, I'm filling up these slightly bigger modules. This is an old plastic container I found at the allotment. And I'm going to fill this one with Scabiosa, Cornflowers, and Snapdragons. So the Scabiosa variety I'm growing is kind of like a powdery blue, but that doesn't really matter because I'm growing them for the seed heads again, which you can dry, and they look like these amazing little pom-poms. They're really cool. I saved the seeds from the ones I grew last year, and they all came up really well. So that's them. And then the next are cornflowers. So, you know, the delightful blue, bright sky blue flowers. And these are great for all sorts of insects, including pollinators. I think I've had a couple bees fall asleep in cornflowers before. And so again, I'm planting them pretty much up to their seed leaves and holding them by their seed leaves and then pressing down on the compost just gently, because watering them in will sort of press it down as well. And then the last one here are Snapdragons. Now I haven't grown these before, but I'm very, very excited to grow them. So they've been doing really well in this little paper pot, surprisingly. And I'm just pricking them out now. So they grow quite slowly, I find, here. Just little seed leaves currently visible, but their root system's actually quite big. So it was time to prick them out. So that's all done. And then next, finally, we've got the veg again. So pricking out chilies and aubergines here, and then we'll get to the tomatoes afterwards. So same multi-purpose compost, tamping it down, picking out any really big bits because the roots are still really fine. And then this is the truffetti pepper, making a hole. And you can plant these right up to their seed leaves which is great because it helps support them, but they don't actually grow roots from their stem like tomatoes do, but it kind of helps with support. Now, I definitely could have pricked these out earlier, especially these aubergines, but never mind. So the roots ball is actually quite big, which is why I've chosen these big containers. But it just means you have to be careful kind of teasing these roots apart. This aubergine took a lot longer to grow, Listata di Giulia, and I kind of have fingers crossed I actually get fruit from this because it is a bit behind now. And definitely fingers crossed I get fruit from this one so that I actually get my very first aubergine. This one's Turkish Dream. And I'm not starting to harden these off yet because it's still too cold outside. So they just stay inside the house in a very sunny windowsill. And I make sure that they don't catch any draft either. So I don't keep them too close to the window either, just so they don't kind of get too close to the cold window because nights are still very cold. And then just showing you one more Trifetti pepper. I promised I'd only grow one because I don't have any space, but never mind. I've potted up a couple. So a friend is going to get the other pepper. I don't eat too spicy food, and these are very, very spicy because I grew them last year. And then on to the tomatoes. So I'm going to do them 3 different ways. And first I'll show you from the trays into individual pots. I'm just showing you to always hold them by their seed leaf, and you can plant them right up to their seed leaves as well. So that whole stem can be buried. And levering them out really gently. That root is really long, which is great, but again, these could have been pricked out sort of as soon as the true leaves can be seen. And you know the difference because the true leaves actually kind of look like tomato leaves. So I'm just planting that right up to its stem, so I need some more compost. So the true leaves actually smell like tomato leaves versus the seed leaves just kind of look generic and don't really have a smell. And so as soon as the true leaves come out, you can prick them out. And they really grew quite a good root system being in this tray altogether for so long. So that's actually going to end up being quite a big tomato. And I could have planted it even higher. You can still see there's still some space until the seed leaf, but the root system was so long I didn't want to crowd it too much. So yeah. And then ideally when the tomatoes get older, you don't ever want to water from above. You just want to water the compost, but because it's so low to the ground there, it's fine for now. So just making sure I get this in as deep as I can. And giving it a good tap is really important because it means that there won't be air pockets. The roots do not like air pockets. They want to be nice and snug and have good contact with the soil. So giving things a good tap is really important. And then the next way is going to be from the pellets, those coir pellets that we grew them in. So you can see the roots coming out the bottom now. That's the true leaf, and then that's the seed leaf. And for this one, I am actually going to cut them out because like I said in the other episode where we sowed the tomatoes, there's the roots. I don't really like these, and I kind of suspect that the outer coating doesn't actually break down completely. So this tray, I'm going to take them all out, and then I'll do a comparison to the next tray where I'm actually not going to keep them in the pellet, where I'm going to keep them in the pellet and see the difference between growth. So I kind of like taking them out as well because then I can even get them in a bit deeper depending on how the roots are growing. So the roots, hasn't made a massive root ball in these pellet things versus the trays. The root system was really healthy. So, we'll just see. And the reason, the way I know the difference is I put new labels into these ones and the labels are bigger. So bigger black labels, these are the ones that I took out of the kind of pellet wrapper. And then there'll be 2 empty containers at the end, which I'm going to fill up with the mix of vermiculite and multipurpose and then sift the top layer. And then I'm going to sow another 2 tomato varieties in there, but I'll show you that in a sec. So these are the containers I'm using, nice and deep. I really like these containers, and nice hard plastic. It's recycled plastic, and the only issue is that when they grow, they're going to have to come out of here quite quickly because ideally tomato leaves don't touch too much as they're growing because it kind of stunts their growth. So yeah, their leaves are going to touch quite quickly in these, but it's so useful because you can start hardening them off just by putting the whole tray out rather than having to collect each individual pot. And of course, I'm still growing at least 2 of each of the varieties, even though I promised myself that I would only grow on 1 of each variety. So yes, filling the last 2 modules in that one, and I'm sowing, yes, 2 more tomato varieties. I couldn't help myself. This one's a Centriflora type, which I've never grown before. Cent meaning 100 in French, and fleur meaning flowers. So it's 100 flowers. So you get loads and loads of flowers on one truss. So I'm excited to see what this one's like. It's like a bush variety, so I won't be pinching out. And then the last one is chocolate cherry, which is a chocolate colored cherry tomato that's supposed to be delicious. And I've got my lovely friend to thank for the seeds. Thank you very much. If you want a detailed video on sowing tomato seeds, you can check out my week 10 video from a couple weeks ago. So now back to the excitement of seed sowing. I'm mixing some vermiculite to give it an open texture for the seedlings. And then I'm filling, because it's multi-purpose, the bottom with unsifted compost, just pulling out any really big bits, and then sifting the top layer, which is especially important for really fine seeds like the Digitalis that we're about to sow, and give it a little tamp down so that the seeds have good contact. So Digitalis seeds are teeny tiny, and normally you'd mix sharp sand with them for sowing, but I don't have any sharp sand, so I'm just being really careful to try and scatter as kind of evenly as I can. And then I'm pressing them down into the compost a little bit because you surface sow Digitalis, meaning you don't cover it at all. And then I'm just filling up more containers to sow some Aquilegia and violas. And again, picking out, leaving any bigger lumps. So Aquilegia are my nemesis. I've sown them a few times from the same packet, so now the seeds are getting old, which means my chances are getting lower and lower. But I really, really love Aquilegia, but I don't actually grow any. So that's a really pretty one called Chocolate Soldier from Chiltern Seeds. And then now I'm sowing violas, and I put half of them in the freezer to cold stratify for a couple weeks, and then the other half I'm doing straight from the packet just to see if that makes a difference in germination. And then the seeds are really fine, but the packet does say to cover with a bit of compost, so I'm doing a tiny layer of compost and then a little bit of vermiculite, again, just to lessen the chances of dampening off disease. A light water, and then I'll keep those inside. And now, back to the veg. Now, I've been trained to grow leeks, but I've never actually grown them out at the allotment before. I find onions a bit harsh unless they're cooked all the way down in like a soup or something. And so braised leek for me is just super delicious. I love, love, love them. So I feel like this is what I've kind of been missing on the plot, so I'm determined to be successful. These are a winter harvesting variety, so you can sow them a bit later and they'll stand through winter, which is really nice. And next year I might graduate to a summer and autumn variety, depending on how these ones go. I'm just a little nervous about the rust, which I know is prevalent on our site because it's hit our garlic before. So yes, fingernails width depth, and then I'm planting 2 seeds per module because I want to plant them in pairs out. And then I'm just covering over, and then I'll just put some vermiculite on for fun, and then giving them a water. So I could have planted maybe a couple more seeds per module just in case some didn't germinate, but my packet should be quite fresh, so I am hopeful. So I'm just filling more seed trays here for the second batch of successional lettuce, some chard, and a surprise vegetable right at the end that I'll tell you about. So again, just using sifted compost on the top, which is good for the lettuce. And if you want to see detailed sowing of lettuce varieties, then you can check out my week 7 video, which went through it in more detail. And yes, I'm growing quite a few varieties of lettuce again, so I'm doing pretty much the second batch of every single one I grew before. And next week, we're going to plant the ones out at the allotment. So then by the time these are ready to prick out, the container that I used at the very beginning will be vacant and I can put these inside. So you can do successional sowing kind of every 2 weeks, but I've done it a month. And then, yeah, I don't need loads of containers because I don't have much space. So key thing is lots of vermiculite on the top, which really helps with the dampening off disease. And then I'm putting a container over the top, and then these will go into my propagator. And then as soon as they're up, I'll put them out in the cold frame. And then I'm doing my first sowing of chard, which is in the exact same family as beetroot, Beta vulgaris, subspecies vulgaris, Amaranthaceae family. And they look exactly like beetroot seeds, kind of corky and knobbly. And these will go on producing for me for a really long time. So I really do love chard. They come in all really fun colors. So pink flamingo is one of my favorites, and I'm doing a multicolored one. They're really great. And I've sown them exactly the same way as beetroot. which is to use the multi-sowing technique. So I've planted about 4 or 5 seeds per module, but I will thin a few more than I would with the beetroot. So I'll probably leave about 3 plants per plug, and then as they grow, I kind of thin them out. So I'll use some as baby leaves. And then I give them a good watering because they're corky and they want to absorb a lot of water. And then for the final vegetable seed, these are Agretti, which I've not grown before. I'm really excited to try them. Supposedly they're a bit like samphire, which that has that kind of crunchy, salty taste, but easier to grow. So you don't need to kind of constantly keep adding salt water and that sort of thing. So I've done half the seeds just dry from the packet and then half the seeds overnight in water. And I actually did this, but I did this previously and the water went moldy. The seeds went moldy, so definitely only 24 hours in the water. But I already know that the ones that were in the water overnight did better and germinated much more quickly than the other ones. And apparently the germination is really, really low on Agretti, but actually I already know that I've had okay germination because, as you'll see in a sec, I filmed the kind of pan of the rest of the vegetables some days later to show you, and they already came up. And they came up in a really weird way. And the first one on the surface that came up, I actually thought it was like a piece of wire that kind of fell. There you can see them there. That's the Agretti. And so I picked it off. So I actually disposed of one of the seedlings by accident. Anyway, I keep the lettuce covered until it germinates. You can see the flowers we pricked out, the tomatoes we potted up, and everything else from this week. So if you enjoyed, I hope you'll consider subscribing and clicking that notification bell so you know exactly when the next one comes up. And leave me a comment below if you are growing something new this week to try, or something that you've grown for several years and you just really like. I'd love to hear from you.